Good morning. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here. So thank you so much for coming here. And special thanks to the organizers for having all these wonderful people here together. I want to talk about something that I think can greatly help us, but we have reluctance to do, which is to talk about code reviews. Uh, I call it code reviews you said because we often have doubts about code reviews. So I want to talk about some of my experience bringing code reviews. But before I get started, uh, I've been programming for about 35 years. And one of the very first jobs I had a long time ago, uh, I was required to do code reviews. And I dreaded it, I hated it. And years later, and sometimes it takes a long time to realize how valuable things are. And I want to share with you some of the experience I've had over the years with this aspect of developing software. But before we get started on that, I want to start with a confession I want to make. I like honesty. I like people, telling the truth about themselves because then it makes it a lot easier for us to work with us, with each other. It builds trust. So I will make my first confession. I'll be very honest about it. I am really terrible at writing code. If you ever look at my code, you're going to be shocked. And you're going to say, oh my goodness, you speak so much, how terrible your code is. So I will tell you for sure, my code sucks. But then I found something amazing that I didn't know before. While I'm terrible at writing code, I'm really good at finding fault with other people's code. And that's what I think is a superpower. So you don't have to write great code. You just need to be good at complaining about others' code. And the benefit of this is I can write crappy code, you can do as well, and we both can review each other's code, and we can do really super good. Because the goal is to do well, not the goal to say we are cool. So the goal is how can we collectively really do well? So rather than taking pride in saying, I write awesome code, nobody needs to look at it. What if we say, I write crappy code, but we can improve it together? And that is one thing I've embraced over time is rather than trying to really hide my weakness, what if I try to turn that into strength to say, I got something written, now we can improve it and we can move forward. Now, of course, we all talk about development, but the first law of programming says lowering quality lengthens the development time. So if you want to go slow, write really bad code. It would start slowing you down naturally. But of course, nobody wants to go slow. We want to go faster. So if you want to go faster, you got to write really good code. But I just talked about how it's almost impossible for any of us to write good code. But how do we really turn the code we are writing into better code? That's what we want to talk about. But of course, the first question you want to ask is, why should I really write good code? And we talked about lower quality lengthens it over time. But as it turns out, let's be honest about it. We cannot be agile if our code sucks. You are sitting in that meeting, they're talking about having to make a change to this XYZ module, and you realize, oh my goodness, when my team touched that XYZ module the last time, nobody went home that weekend. We are not going to make this change happen. So the fact of agile development just fails and falls apart if you have a really poor quality code. So if you want to be agile, you need to have really good quality code. That becomes very essential. But of course, the question is, what is agile development? I go to companies and they are so eager to tell me, Venkat, we are agile. And I tell them, I'm so glad we got that out of the way. Now let's talk about what you actually do. So what is really agile development? So I travel around the world, I work with a lot of companies, and I'll tell you what I find agile development really is. Agile development is about stand-up meetings. Thank you for laughing, right? So yeah, no, it's not about stand-up meeting. Why do we do stand-up meeting? This is one of the beautiful things about human beings. Human beings love ceremony. Human beings love ritual. You know why we like ritual? Because it allows us to hide from real work. So you don't have to do the real work. Hey, we got stand up to do right now. What about that code that's failing? We got stand up to do right now. So, no, it's not stand up. Then what is agile development? Well, here's what I found it's about doing Scrum. No, it's not about Scrum. Scrum was never meant to be, right? So it's just a process. And what does agile development say? People over process. What does the industry do? Process over people. Go figure. Cannot be. Then what is it? Oh, it's got to be about velocity. If you got really good velocity, you're agile, right? No. Velocity is the stupidest thing people invented. If you want me to go fast in the beginning, I'm going to slow down when things become hard and important. So you want me to go slow in the beginning, not fast. Then what is it? I think I finally figured it out. It is really about hiring the next best Scrum Master. That's got to be it. This really saddens me. When I go to a company, somebody says, I'm a Scrum Master. I say, I'm really sorry to hear that. This was not meant to be. This was never supposed to be a title, not a position. This is where people go if they never want to do any real work. So, no, it's not that either. So then what is really agile development? It really is feedback-driven development. That's what it really is fundamentally. To be agile is to do something, first of all, and have it seen, take the feedback, improve on what we do, and repeat it until we arrive at something that's valuable and useful. So, agile development is feedback-driven development. That's what we want to really do. Now, obviously, the question is, how do we get that feedback? Well, one way to get the feedback is to have the application being used actively. Years ago, I found this out. One of the things agile development process often tells us is do a demo at the end of the sprint. I find that frustrating because demos are show and tell. You can show all the beautiful stuff, people can listen to it, but the minute when you develop something, you give it to your users and you watch them kick and scream and cry. That's called feedback. The most effective feedback. When they say, what nonsense is this? Or when they say, whoa, that was really super easy to use. Both of those are feedback. So real feedback, valuable feedback, comes from people using your software. So I like to give people software very early to use so I get relevant, useful, valuable feedback. So that's one kind of feedback. But that's not the only feedback we want. The next feedback, which we all can rely upon, is automated test. I love automated test. The reason I love automated test is I write a piece of code and I just save my file. And immediately, when I wrote the book Practice on Agile Developer, I said, automated tests are angels on my shoulder. I imagine the test is an angel with a little wing. It sits right here, and I save my file. It immediately whispers in my ears, Venkat, yeah, that code sucks. Don't push it. I'm like, thank you. Thanks for watching me over. Unit tests make me look like a better programmer than I really am. And I would rather have my unit tests tell me my code sucks than my colleagues and customers tell me my code sucks. Because part of what we care about is reputation. You want to know things actually work. I cannot tell you how many times I go to websites for airlines and banks and insurance companies, and I see errors on the website. I once tweeted, I said, don't worry about testing your software. If it doesn't work, your users will tweet about it. That's not the reputation we want to build. So the second type of feedback is automated test. So users using the product early on, having automated tests, but a third feedback is code reviews. And you said, wait a second, did you just say code review? Raise Raise your hand if you love code reviews and you want to do more of that. And not a single two misguided people in the room, right? Everybody else is like, nope, I'm not going to raise my hand for that, right? So we don't like code review. Nobody likes it. Well, no, mostly nobody likes it. There are 3.5 people in the room. One was kind of doing this. So everybody else is like, nah, not for me. Why? Why don't we write code reviews? The developers dread it. You know it because you can see what happened in this room when I asked the question, right? Nobody's like, nah, code review, not for me. In the meantime, the developers really are like, I'm not interested. This is too much for me. And the developer says, wait a second, you're going to invite the team into a room, project my code on the big screen, and talk about me? I'm going to call in sick. I'm not going to come to work that day, right? Because I don't want that nonsense of code review. In the meantime, the boss just freaked out. The boss comes running to you and said, excuse me, did you just send an email to the team that there's a code review on Thursday at 2 o'clock? And you said, yeah. And the boss says, heck no. The last time you had a code review, there was a fight. 2 people quit, and we had to call the cops to stop the fight. No code review for you, right? So that doesn't work with the management either. So dreadfully, we all hate code reviews, and people just quit in the environment where we do code reviews. So why bother with this? Should we all not be doing other more fun things together? But I beg to differ. I've done code reviews extensively, and I want to share with you some of the things we have done to make this a useful task. So first of all, to keep in mind, a good code reflects empathy. To me, coding is about empathy. It is not about writing code that compiles. It's a writing code that communicates with somebody else. What makes you an effective communicator? Not because you can speak well. It's because others can understand you well. That's the key. It's not about your fluency. It's about absorption from the other side. And that's exactly what we do with code. Code is about empathy. When you write code, you're asking, will the other person reading the code, which by the way, is you after a vacation, can they understand what this code is saying? It's about empathy. When you feel the empathy, you write the code differently. When you lack the empathy, you write the code brutally, violently, and it hurts everybody who touches it and reads it. So it's about empathy. But there is always a developer at the other end of the push. What do you do in a civilized world? You've probably seen this. You're walking through the door, and you push the door open, and ever so gently, you hold it for just one moment because you don't want the door to swing and hit that stranger who is behind you. You may have never seen this person. You may never see them again. But that's your civility. You hold the door just for a minute so it doesn't hit them on their face. Every time you push the door, there's somebody behind you pulling it. That's exactly what happens to the code as well. When you push the code, there's a poor developer on the other side. And this is not a stranger for crying out loud. It's a person who works with you. So we need to really have more empathy in the code we write. Now, one other word I often like to use is the words of Newton. Newton said, I see the farthest because I stand on the shoulders of giants. This is something I remind myself a lot every single day. I am whom I am because of the people I work with. Because every single day, they teach me things. They teach me how to write code, how to communicate, how to think, how to solve problems. And we are who we are because of the people around us. And that is something we want to leverage. And code reviews gives us that leverage to learn from people who are around us. How shameful it is to have the best of the people around us, but not benefit from them in learning. So code reviews reflect humility. Humility is, somebody asked me the other day, what is an important characteristics of a good developer? Is it not having ego? I said, no, you need to have ego. Because if you don't have ego, you totally lose self-confidence. You don't have any opinions if you don't have ego. Ego is something you need to have enough, but not too much. But what I would recommend is not having ego, but to have humility in its place. Humility is to say, I'm really good, but I can be better. I'm really good, but I can learn. I'm really good, but I can listen. And to have that humility is a great way to learn. But asking somebody to review your code is a sign of humility. Is to say, look, I implemented the solution. I wrote I solved the problem, but I want to know how I can be better. That is humility. Humility is a beautiful human character because it gives us the ability to be better off ourselves tomorrow than we are today. And if it is your mind telling you it's okay to learn and it's okay to improve, some of the weirdest developers I've seen are the people who say, I'm really good. I don't want anyone to ever look at my code. Usually they are not that good. They just think they are. This actually turns around and it allows us to improve and say, I know a lot of stuff, but I got a different perspective. And I can do better than what I am. And that really places you at a higher level tomorrow than you are today. But code review, I would argue, is the next big thing, best thing compared to pair rotation. I worked in companies where we have done pair programming, but in a few companies where we've done really effective is we do pair rotations. We rotate pairing about every half a day to 1 day. Well, code review automatically happens when we rotate pairs. If you're not rotating pairs, well, code review is the next best thing you can really enjoy. Now, what is important to keep in mind is that code reviews are both technical and sociological. This is one of the things to keep in mind. It's very technical. When I'm doing code review, I am getting deep into the technical aspects. I talk about where there might be a memory leak. I talk about where there could be a concurrency problem. I talk about where there could be a deadlock. So it's very, very technical in detail. But we should not lose sight of the fact that you're not reviewing code, you're reviewing the work of a human. So it is a sociological as much as technical it is. If we forget the human behind the code, we fail at communicating. Because at that point, it turns into an insult and people don't like about it. So it's as much sociological as it is technical. But what are the benefits? Why should we do code reviews in that case? Now, there are benefits to individuals, there are benefits to teams, but there are benefits to the person who you are reviewing. But keep in mind, there is benefits to the person who is reviewing the code as well. So every single one of us and the team benefits from this. So for the person writing the code, what are the benefits? Well, you got another pair of eyes looking at the code. That's one of the easiest ways to find bugs in general. And also, your code becomes readable. I would argue the only way to write readable code is for somebody to read it. If nobody has ever read a code, you have no way to claim it's readable. You yourself probably cannot read it after a break. So it's important to make it readable, and the only way to readable is to have somebody read it. And also, you can learn from your colleagues. They show you things. They tell you, hey, you're using this particular API, but in the newer version of Java, this other function exists. You may look at using that one. And I cannot tell you how many times I'm like, whoa, I did not know that function exists. Thanks for pointing that out. As a person writing the code, I learn a lot when you review the code. I'll be absolutely honest about it. When I started writing my very first book, I was in a state of shock. I was writing commercial software, and if the software fails, it can blow up a refinery, and people could get killed. And people are like, yeah, you write code, don't bother us. I wrote the first book. It sells a few copies, a few people read the book, and there were 70 people reviewing it. And I'm like, what's funny? How people were reviewing the book and not the code I was writing commercially at the time. And the point is, the people were reviewing the book, and they give such a beautiful review. When I write books these days, a publisher may say, oh, go find 3 reviewers. I'm like, what? No way. I'm not going to find 3 reviewers. I find 30 reviewers. And the publishers kind of look at me as like, whoa, that's extreme. I'm like, yep, because I like to make the book better. I would rather the reviewers tell me what I need to change than the readers eventually find errors in it. So, and different people have different perspectives. And you leverage, you benefit, it's for your better. So to me, the same thing with code. When I write code, I have people review it because I can learn from them. You say, okay, great. As a person who wrote the code, you get the benefit. What about the guy who's reviewing, or the person who is reviewing the code? What benefit does they get from it? So for the reviewer, it really helps them to learn as well. I cannot tell you honestly how many times I'm reviewing somebody's code and I'm like, whoa, I didn't realize you could do that. I didn't realize you could do meta programming that way. So there are times I have remembered and learned concepts that I never knew exist when I'm actually reviewing somebody's code. I had somebody come and tell me this, and I thought this was absolutely great way of thinking. He said these words. He said, code reviews either make me a hero or makes me smarter. He said the code reviews make me a hero or make me smarter. I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, code reviews make me a hero because the person whose code I'm reviewing, that person comes to me and says, whoa, that made my code better, thank you. It makes me feel like a hero. But it makes me smarter because there are times when I review the code and I don't know concepts they have used, and I became, smarter by learning from the code I was reviewing. When you have that attitude that either you are a hero or you become smarter, that's a win-win situation every time you review somebody's code. And so you are able to find things that you couldn't know before. And overall, you're able to raise the bar of your team. You end up working with a better team. You end up working with a smart set of people, and it feels like you're working with adults, and that becomes a lot more effective in the long run, so it's for your better as well. What about the team, though? Why should the company care about it? Because when we refactor the code, we are able to reduce the cost of change over time. But one of the key things is collective ownership. When you don't have collective ownership, what happens? The people who are writing the code, when they leave, nobody else can maintain the code after that. That becomes really hard. This is called the truck factor. The truck factor is number of people in your team, God forbid, should be run over by a truck for your project to fail. And guess what that number is in a lot of companies? A 1. That's right, which is scary. I once worked in a company, I'm not exaggerating, this is true story. We had a timing engine. If the timing engine is a little off, the simulations will give a wrong result. If the simulation give a wrong result, your product will behave very differently. Engineers who use it will design something that is not correct. We could eventually get sued for a flaw in the product. So the timing engine, the person who wrote the timing engine was gone, never to be found again. He quit. So there's a code for the timing engine. And my boss will tell every other week, we have a timing engine, we need to make it better, we need to improve it. And then with a lot of pain, he would say, there's nobody in this company who understands the code. This was a repeated story every week. And I got tired of listening to this. So I spent 2 weeks of my life. I did nothing. Every day, from the time I wake up to the time I sleep, I read through every single line of code of the timing engine. 2 weeks later, I wrote a report of how the timing engine works. That was the best time of my life and worst time of my life. Because when I finished it and wrote the report, from that week onwards, in the meetings, my boss would say, this timing engine is critical, we have to improve it. Nobody in this company, and then he would pause and say, except Venkat, understands this code. It was so wonderful to hear that I was the only surviving human who understood this code. A year went by. They hired somebody smarter than me. much better developer. And he kept listening. Nobody in this company knows this code other than Venkat. So he decided to spend 2 weeks of his life. He read through every single line of code. And then the Monday after was the worst day of my life because we were in a meeting. And he looked at everybody and looked at me and said, Venkat. I said, yes, I read your report. I read the code. You're wrong. That's not the way the timing engine works. I said, oh my goodness. I thought I understood that code. I'm sorry. Can you tell me how it works? He said, I don't know. All I found out was it doesn't do what you say it does. I gave up. I can't understand it. From the next week, my boss said, nobody in this company understands this code anymore. Can you imagine having a code that nobody can touch? That is as good as the code being lost. At least you can say, I don't know where the code is. There's a code you can see, but you can't touch. But my boss is a very smart person. He went to the system administrator and said, turn off the privilege to write. So nobody had write access to the code anymore. And that's how we moved on. So that's kind of scary, isn't it? To have a code that nobody can maintain. So when do we do this? Who does it? How do we do it? Never review code that is not being compiled. So the very first thing is, hey, have you compiled the code? Nope, do that first. Never review the code that's not being run through unit test, automated test. So if tests are required, just kidding, write the damn test. And make sure the tests are passing. And of course, through quality control tools. When you have gone through these tools as a part of your CI build, then when a human reviews it, they can take it to a next better level. I don't want to keep telling things that a tool can find. I want you to run through the tools before I review the code. And of course, start with the test. Let me emphasize this. I don't review code anymore. I review the test before I review the code. So when somebody gives me the code to review, I start by reviewing the test, not reviewing the code. Of course, if there's no test, the review ends right there. Dude, I didn't see any test. Shall we pair up and start writing tests for this? So start by reviewing the test. There are times I work with really good developers. Nothing wrong with the code they wrote. But my comment is, have you thought about these two edge cases? I don't see them over there. Maybe you want to write those test cases. So start by reviewing the test and then review the code. I want my test to tell me a story. I want my test to tell me how the code was developed incrementally. My test, as I scan through the test, it gives me the story of the evolution of the code. If the tests are not readable, if the tests are not communicative, that's something to improve. Tests are as important to keep really well as the code is. So start with test, look for missing tests, look for the quality of tests before reviewing the code. When do we review the code? You know, they say pathway to hell is paved on good intentions. A lot of teams, a lot of companies have good intention, but then they get really tied up and do wrong things. One of the policies, so to use the word, that I don't really agree upon and like it, is when companies say, you cannot push this to production until there is a code review. Bad idea. I'll tell you why it's a bad idea. This is a story maybe you wouldn't realize. I see in a lot of companies. The boss comes running. Hey, the code is not in production. Why? Well, I wrote it a few weeks ago. It's not been reviewed. Oh my gosh. Review it. Looks good. Good. Let's push to production. What is that called? Stupidity. It doesn't make any sense. We tied this to a process. If people truly are committed, we don't have that kind of a process in place. So when people say, you can't push to production unless there's a review it now. Looks great. Because I'm the dude between you pushing it to production, and I'm going to say, it looks good. Because if I say, you got to change stuff, I become the bad guy right now. Why is it not in production? Well, he didn't review it. He said it's not good. Hey, what's wrong with you? And the next time he's like, it looks good. So we pretend not really do stuff. So that's why I don't like those processes. Code review is very effective when the person who wrote the code says, I want to improve my code. Can you please review it? That's when you know it's effective. So don't tie this to feature releases. It doesn't work effectively. This is called pretension, not a good practice. Code reviews are really great when the developer who wrote the code truly is interested in asking for the review. This is what I found in teams. When somebody comes to you and says, last time you reviewed my code, it got so much better. Can I please ask you to review again? That's what I do. I go to people and say, hey, you reviewed my code last time. I learned so much from your review. I'm really selfish. Can you review it again for me, please? And that's when you know it actually works. And I'm not just saying that for the sake of saying it. I actually do. I go ask for people because I benefit from that. One other thing I want to emphasize is this. Show a little code, you get a lot of feedback from me. Show me a lot of code, you get only a little feedback from me. So you want to ask, how do you review it? Review incrementally. Now let's be honest about it. You are starting on a new little feature. You are implementing a certain algorithm. You're not sure if this is the way you want to go. So you took the very first step. You went to your colleague and said, can you review this, please? And your colleague says, I got an idea for you. Rather than using this kind of data structure, you should really consider this one. I'm like, hey, thank you. That's a nice recommendation. Let me go work on it. If I finish the feature and I come to you and say, can you review this, please? And you say, I've got an idea for you. I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm done with this feature. And you're telling me I got to change the fundamental data. Do you understand how much code I need to change? And you're wondering, then why are you asking for feedback? So I always say this. Ask me early and frequently. I'll give you my feedback. Ask me at the end. I'll give you my blessings. Because the only thing I can do is, it looks good. Thanks for asking. You're good. You're asking for reviews. I like it. Keep going. Because when you're done, if I tell you, you have to change everything fundamentally, you're going to say you're crazy. The same thing I do with books. When people write their book and say, can you review it? I'm like, what do you mean? Let's talk about how you need to fundamentally change the whole damn book. And they're like, thanks, you're not going to review my book anymore. They write 1 or 2 chapters, they come to me and say, can you take a look at it? I'm like, let's rethink about the philosophy behind this book. And now we are engaged with the author and we are shaping the book together. That's what I do to my editor. I don't throw a book at her and say, review it. I'm like, here are 2 chapters, let's start with it. And she calls me on the phone and says, let's talk about it. What do you want to do in this book? What are the focus? And it takes shape as we go through it. You're benefiting from the feedback. So ask for frequent early feedback if you really want to use the feedback. If you don't want a feedback, you just want a blessing, then do it later. And tell the person, don't go really hard on me. Just look at it and tell me it looks good. That's all I want you to do, right? Be honest about it. So you need to ask the question, when do you want really feedback? That's a question. And the answer to that is, what do you want from that feedback? Do you want to evolve it? Do you want to change it? Start early, be frequent. Be continuous, not episodic. So if you continuously do code reviews, then it becomes easier. But it's part of our responsibility as well. If I tell you, I got code to write, I don't have time to review it, that's not professionalism. Why would you want to write more code faster with poor quality than to take the time to write better quality code and improve it? So part of my job every day should be to write code, but I need to save time to review code for others as well. If I don't commit to that on my schedule, we're not being truthful to this particular activity. So review in stages, not in feature chunks. That becomes more effective. How do we review the code? So go beyond the styles. Yeah, sure, where the curly braces should be is important, but go beyond that as well. Look at, is the code easier to understand? Is the flow really good? Should things be moved around? Should we break things into smaller methods? Should we apply design principles? Is the code communicative? That's what you want to look at. And so get out of the way, the first things first, are the variable names good? Are the method names descriptive? Is the code too long? And is the code needed? I cannot tell you how many times my code review is //Yagni. You're not going to need it. and the programmer deletes the code they wrote. Because they're so ambitious writing the code, they forgot the requirements. So does the requirement even want this? No. But then why do you write it? Because I thought that would be really cool to handle that situation. I was looking at a piece of code. A developer had gone through and done so much error checking. I said, when will this error ever happen? It may never happen. Then why are you writing this? Well, what if it does? Well, you said it will never happen. Right? So understand the requirements first. Don't write code for no good reason. What do you do when you find bug? Well, before I talk about it, this is very embarrassing. I was in Bern teaching a workshop. And I do live coding when I do workshops. I was live coding, looking at my monitor, and somebody in the audience said, there's a bug. And I paused. I said, my God, I wrote a code with a bug. And I kept looking at the code. I said, I don't see it. And somebody said, there's a bug. And 3 people in the room said, there's a bug. I'm like, really? Where? And they said something like, line 31. I'm scratching my head. What's wrong with line 31? And they said, look behind. And I did. And there was literally a bug on the screen, which is kind of annoying when it happens. So what if you find a bug? This is something I found out about 7 or 8 years ago. I used to find that when I found a bug, I used to write a paragraph describing, here's a bug on this line, if the input is this, blah, blah, blah. And then I suddenly realized, why am I writing words when I find a bug? This takes a bit more effort. But when I realized it the first time I did this 6 years or 7 years ago, I did not write about a bug I found. I wrote a test that failed because of the bug. And I quietly pushed the test into the version control. Didn't say a word. The continuous integration failed. Ding! It sends a message to the developer. I'm like, I'm good. I don't have to worry about it. The developer receives the message. Oh my God, the old man Venkat checked in something. My code is broken. Looks at it. And an hour later, I was walking by. The developer said, hey, I saw what you did there. And I said, what did I do? You found a bug, didn't you? I said, I did. And you wrote a test rather than telling me there's a bug. I said, yeah, I hope that was useful. And he said, I guess you're trying to tell me a little story here. I said, what's the story? And the story you're trying to tell me is, when you find a bug, don't fix it first, write a test and then fix it. I'm like, my job here is done. That's exactly what you want to do. Don't fix a bug, write a test first. And then he said, but did you know there are 3 bugs and not 1? I said, my gosh, I didn't know it. And he said, look at the 3 new tests I wrote. I'm like, this is great. Because that's exactly the practice you want to promote. When you find a bug, don't fix it first. Write a test and then fix it. And what great it is as a person reviewing the code to write a test. There are times later on I've learned I would start writing a test, and for the life of me, the test wouldn't fail. I'm like, what's wrong with this? There's a bug and my test doesn't fail. And that's when I will realize I didn't really understand the code. And now my comment is, hey, I thought the code was doing this, but I found it was doing something else. Could you please refactor to make it really easy to understand? So don't write notes about it. Write a test when you find a bug. Be constructive. It never helps to go to a developer and say, I read your code. And they say, really? And you said, it smelled like a garbage truck. You didn't help them in any way. That's being, abrasive. That's being impolite. That's being rude. That's being a jackass. Don't do that. Instead, be constructive. I am always at the other end as well. There are people smarter than me helping me to make my code better. It's my turn to make your code a little bit better. So be constructive. Don't tell them it's terrible. Don't tell them how terrible they are writing the code. Instead, tell them, what could it be better? What can they do to make this code better? And there are times when they say, thanks for the suggestion, but I found a different way as well. That's good. And there are times when they don't know what to do, and they take your advice, so that's better. Make it really safe to be honest. That is one of the most important things. You want to make sure. So imagine this for a minute. If I come to you and say, hey, you know what? By the coffee machine, right? You say, you know what? I was reviewing John's code yesterday. Oh my gosh, I don't know who hired him. Terrible code I've ever seen in my life. Guess what you're thinking right now? You're not thinking, John is terrible. You're thinking, wait a minute. If Venkat talks to me about John's code, I wonder what he talks about my code to other people. Venkat is not trustworthy. I'm not going to ask reviews from him. So we need to think about a culture. And I know some things, and you know other things. I can write good code in one place. There's a lot of places I cannot write good code. I can help improve your code. You can improve my code. And collectively as a team, we are learning from each other. So one of the key things to always think about is how can we create an environment that is very safe for us to be honest? When we create an environment that's safe to be honest, we thrive learning from each other. And that becomes very effective. Like I said, code reviews are things I do quite a lot. But one of the things we do oftentimes is what I like to call as a tactical code review. What I mean by a tactical code review is we don't bring the team together in a room, project the screen, code on the screen, and have people critique it. That's not very effective. What we do is I write a piece of code. I ask one of the developers on the team to review it. He gives me my feedback. The next evaluation I make, I have another developer review it, and he gives me a feedback. We rotate among the developers to review the code. We don't have seniority. We don't tell this person is senior, they review the code. This person is junior, they only write code. No, everybody reviews the code. A junior developer also can be very helpful. They can come to you and say, I'm sorry, I don't understand this code. Or even better, the junior developers are the ones who are happily looking for various solutions all the time. And they come to me and say, I know you wrote this code like this, but have you looked at this other library? I'm like, interesting. Now that you asked, why don't you go do a prototype for me? Let me take a look at it. Now collectively we can make it better. So anybody in the team can review the code. But one thing we do emphasize, we never allow people who don't write code to review it. Having people who don't write code review it has a name for it. It's called a priesthood-based code review. These people are priests. When I used to write code 15 years ago, dangerous people. You want the person actively writing code to be reviewing your code, not somebody whose job is to review the code. Just like Scrum Masters don't create code reviewers as a job title, right? That's not going to help. This is just part of what we do, not a position to hold. Hope that was useful. Thank you so much for your time.